All right, good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jeff Baer, Superintendent of Los Altos School District. And if you are here for a town hall on pooled testing in Los Altos School District, you are in the right place. We're going to talk a bit about quarantining, should there be positive cases, as well as pooled testing and the benefits as it relates to quarantining. As well. Want to introduce two LASD employees who have been outstanding resources during the pandemic. Monica Sidher and Mary Fitzgerald are both district nurses here in Los Altos, and they're going to be walking us through a few slides on those two topics. So we'll start with some information about quarantining, and then we'll move on to pool testing, and we'll save some time for questions at the end. So next slide. So those are our, should have said that a moment earlier. So those are our three areas we're going to be covering this evening. Next slide. So first, a bit about modified quarantine. I'll hand off to Monica now. This has shifted a bit from last year. If you were in person, you may have been involved in quarantining or heard about quarantining. That shifted a bit this year in alignment with new state guidelines, which we know are ever changing. So Monica, talk a bit about that.
Thank you, Jeff. So we do have what we call a modified quarantine for students who are exposed to COVID in the school setting. So if we have two groups of students now, we have vaccinated students as well as unvaccinated students. So vaccinated students can continue to attend school as long as they remain asymptomatic. There are testing guidelines for vaccinated students if they are exposed. And we do go over that with individual families and cases pending on their vaccine status. For unvaccinated students, they as well are able to return to school once we have our first negative test result from the child. And then they need to, so that's what we call immediate testing. So as soon as the notification is sent out, families are to schedule a test for their children. That's how it stands today. And then as soon as we have a negative test result, students can return back to class as long as they remain asymptomatic. And then they do a second test on or after day 5. And if we get those 2 test results, the modified quarantine can end after 7 days, and they can return back to extracurricular activities as well on day 8. This also only applies in the setting where both individuals, the exposed and the positive case, are masked, which in our district, we do have masking in all settings except for when eating or drinking on campus. Next slide. So these are essentially the 4 steps or requirements for the modified quarantine. So can continue to attend school if they remain masked and asymptomatic. In modified quarantine, students cannot attend extracurricular activities. So anything from aftercare, community supports, after school care events, those are all considered extracurriculars, as well as any community events or activities that your child participates in. We need proof of negative tests to return to school, as well as another test on or after day 5 from the last day of exposure. And then we do not accept home tests. So another thing with modified quarantine to review is also the type of testing. So if you are asymptomatic, we do accept antigen tests or PCR tests. The only tests that we do not accept are at-home tests. Next slide. I'll pass it off to Mary here for testing.
All right, thank you, Monica. Next slide.
Monica, Mary, just to emphasize on that last, so hopefully it's clear that the modified the modified quarantine that's in place as compared to last year is that students can attend their school day, but they are essentially quarantined from any other after school cohort. Sorry about that, Mary.
No, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. So this year again, Los Altos School District will be offering pooled testing for weekly for any children TK through 8 who volunteer to be tested. We worked with Concentric last year with our 6th through 8th grade students, and we're very successful. And this year we plan to have all students who wish to participate in this test. Basically, students will self-swab, kind of the simplified version. For that group of students, a swab is then placed for each of them each of those in that classroom into a vial, and that entire vial is tested. If anyone is positive from that PCR pool, we are notified, and then we do a follow-up antigen testing, which is different than we had last year. So the state has provided antigen testing to also be done in the schools. So we will be able to provide that antigen testing on campus, which will make the modified quarantine much easier. And so these will be for the close contacts of a school-based COVID-19 case. Next slide. Again, so how it works is students who volunteer will use a short nasal swab to test at school weekly. If a student does not want to test that day, no one is going to swab them. It is going to be, after being this demonstrated, they will administer their own swab. The samples will be collected together and tested for COVID-19, and this will be in a PCR testing. If there is a positive pool, then the team of testers will return to that school site and administer individual rapid tests so that we can identify which person had contributed to the positive test. Next, please. The benefits to pooled testing are that it is regular weekly testing done on campus. It gives us early detection of, and this is an asymptomatic testing. So it tells us kind of if there is any COVID activity on campus, and even if someone is asymptomatic, it gives us kind of an early heads up. The rapid test that we would do with a follow-up keeps healthy kids in school. We were very successful with this program last year. We did not identify any positive cases. Identifying a positive case is not a negative. If there is a positive case, we want to see it early. But this was a very successful program last year, and the company was it was a pleasure to work with. They were very professional and very responsive to any questions or issues we may have had. This is much more convenient for families, and we hope for a great participation in this. And again, this is voluntary. Only students with consent can participate, and we have been able to, through all the consents that families have submitted, we've been able to break that down into classes, and the testers will come around, the testing team will come around and only allow those students who have consented to contribute to that pool. Next, please. So how can your students—
Mary, if I can just jump in on that last slide.
Yes.
So this is an important point. Only those students who have given consent can participate in the pooled testing. And if there does happen to be a positive, only those students for whom we have consent can participate in the rapid response testing the next morning, right? We plan on doing this once we get a positive the very next day to essentially, we anticipate coming up with more negatives than positives, right? And keeping those students in school so they won't have to miss a school day. Right now, if you happen to have been involved, we have had a few positive cases in our classrooms with no spread, but the families have had to go out and get their own response testing out in the community, either at El Camino Hospital or Walgreens or their practitioner, and it takes a bit of time. So one of the benefits of participating in the pool testing is you also get to participate in the response testing should it become necessary. If you have not given consent for the pool testing, your child will not get to participate in the response testing, and you'll be responsible for getting that response testing on your own in the at a different place in the community. That was it.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. And so say you choose not to sign up now, but then you see how well this is going in a few weeks, you can sign up at any point during the school year. However, just because of how quickly this will turn around, if you find out that you have a positive in the classroom, you cannot sign up that night for the next morning's testing. You do need to do that in advance so that we are prepared to do that. So you can see the consent, I think was sent out by the district earlier, and you just visit the test site, which you can see the address there. Each school has a code. It's basically LASD dash and then the name of your school. And then you enter your student info on the form. We would like you to sign up by September 9th. But again, you are able to sign up at any point during the school year for your student to participate, and we will update our consented list weekly. Next, please. What if there is a positive case in the student's class that is not identified through pool testing? Next. We will notify you. And then Jeff, would you like to take this? I think you know more about this program.
Yep, happy to. So Concentric is only doing response testing for the positives that come if there is a positive as a result of their pool testing. If the positive comes to our attention in a different way, not through the pool testing, we can't use their response testing. So because of that, we have partnered with the high school district, MVLA, and they have individual testing available. And this will be only for response testing for a positive pool test. And you will need to go to either Mountain View High School or Los Altos High School to get that testing done. You can, of course, go to Walgreens or CVS or to your own practitioner as well, but we're making this available just as a convenience to, again, keep our students in school as much as possible. So this is a lot of information. There's a bit more. This is a lot of information. Should there be a positive in your child's class, you will get a letter and you will be notified of the steps necessary when the testing needs to be completed and where you can go for that testing. So both of these, both the pooled tests through Concentric and the partnership with the high school district are both getting up and running right now. So we're close on each of those. We're not quite there yet, but wanted to get this to you in advance of that. Next slide. So again, you can go to either Mountain View High School or Los Altos High School for the follow-up testing that'll get that negative test to get your child back into school. It'll be up and running every day. And we just think it's going to be a convenience for families to have it close within our community. Next slide. So Monica, this is it's like a reminder here.
Yeah, so just a review once again of the modified quarantine. So the goal really is this year moving forward through, while we're still living through COVID, is really to keep asymptomatic healthy children in school, as well as keep them safe. So asymptomatic masked students can continue to come to school. They cannot participate in extracurricular activities. They will do testing twice, so immediately and then again on day 5. And then we will also have the pooled testing program, which Mary spoke to.
Jeff, you're.
Sorry about that. Thank you. What I was saying is we are able to do this masked or this modified quarantine because we are having our students mask both indoors and outdoors when they're not eating. And this limits the opportunity for a close contact without a mask. That would lead to a different quarantining path and not allowing students to be in school as much as this modified quarantine does. All right, so that is the information we want to share with you. We'll get to questions in just a moment. If you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. I do want to emphasize and encourage you to sign up for the pooled testing. There are many benefits to it. This is a company we worked with all of last year. They do an outstanding job. They are in more schools this year, both East Coast and West Coast, and have a pretty significant West Coast operation now. And we really do think it is a good way to get an early indication of if there are any positives in our classrooms, asymptomatic positives in our classrooms. All right, with that, I'll call your name, give just a moment for Marcy to unmute you or allow you to talk. Ravi Gallatin.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to know, or maybe you could explain a bit why the pool testing is optional and not required. This is a life-threatening illness, and I just think the results would obviously be far more accurate if everybody participated. Thank you for allowing me to ask the question.
Yeah, we do. I think the short answer to that is that we don't have the authority to require testing at this point in time. Bruno Alvarez.
Sorry, I think I raised my hand by accident. I think it was
no
that
problem.
you were talking on mute, Jeff. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. Tate Wong.
Hi, I was just wondering, so after the kids have swabbed themselves, how long do the results come in?
So we overnight the package because we'll take it from the entire school. And then generally last year we were getting results within 24 hours to 48 hours after it was received at the laboratory.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, my question is, how is the testing coordinated and will it affect instruction time? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we do have a schedule for each school. The testing will take place once a week. And the team will go from classroom to classroom. Last year when we did it, it took about 5 minutes, between 5 and 10 minutes per classroom. So I think the time taken away from the classroom is very negligible. And we had very positive a response to it last year. So thank you.
All right, Melissa Sobel. Glad we got you tonight, Melissa.
Thank you. First of all, I want to start off by thanking you all so much for putting this together. This is such an important program, and it's going to go a long way towards keeping our kids safe and helping us all have peace of mind. So thank you so much. I had two questions for you. One, I apologize, I joined like a minute late and I may have missed it, but when is the program starting? And then the second question is, I'm wondering what your current thinking is in terms of having teachers and staff tested, and that includes both LASD teachers and staff as well as extracurricular on-site staff and teachers tested. I know they're all vaccinated, but testing as well, since of course they could have breakthrough cases. Thank you again so much for doing this.
Sure. As for when it's going to start, as soon as we can get all of the logistics together and get it up and running, I would say no sooner than September 20th. And with regard to the testing of staff, yes, that's on our list as well. We just wanted to prioritize having students tested first, especially our elementary students who are unvaccinated. They really took priority in our planning. All right, Chanel Peterson.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to ask this question. It may kind of been answered, but I'll try to ask you in this way. When you're doing the pooled testing, I mean, I guess what's the percentage that you've got from, say, you're going to one classroom, right? And testing that group of kids that say, yes, I'm going to do it. But what's the percentage that you're not? Because that can really, like if you get a positive, you don't know if you got the ones that were not, agreed on the testing. Do you know what I'm asking? I don't know if that makes sense. Like what if in that group they test positive and then, no one tests positive, but or someone tests positive and you don't find the person in there. And actually it's one of the ones that never got tested. Does that make sense? Like
No,
what percentage you're gonna-
I understand the question. Mary, do you want to respond to that or do you want me to?
I'll let you take it because I'm not sure I got it.
Oh,
Yeah, so
sorry.
it's essentially, if let me just make sure I understand the question, Chanel. It's the question is that if you get, let's say 50% participation from a given set of students in a class, and the 50% that are testing all test negative, but what if you have a positive in the 50% that does not give consent? Is that the question?
Correct. Like, well, say, okay, the group you pulled, right? You got everybody negative except the one, right? And then you retest them all again. And then, is there a possibility that person could have gotten positive from the group that never got tested? I'm just saying, because you got 50% participation in the classroom, you got 50% they're not, there's a possibility you don't know what that unknown is. Was there a high percentage rate in your pooled testing, I guess, in each class?
Last year, Mary, do you remember what it was? It was over 50% in each class.
Yeah,
Over 50%.
it depended on which class, but it was well over 50%. And some, I believe it was around 80, depending on the school.
So it is why we are working to encourage folks to participate, and we will be doing additional outreach to those who don't, just to make sure and understand, make sure that they understand what this is, because what the pooled testing is, because I think I'm getting at your concern is that we do want, it would be great if 100% of our students participated in this, because then we'd have certainty for that moment in time. So we will continue to work on it, but we last year had somewhere between 70 and 80%, I would say, on average in each class, which is a healthy percentage.
Okay, thank you. It's good to know.
Thank you. Ivan Gali or Yvonne Gali?
Good evening. Thank you so much for making this program available. A bit of a different question. Do you have any early indication as to when the vaccine might be available to children younger than 12?
Oh, that's a question I ask Mary and Monica 3 times a week. Yeah, have you heard anything recently, Mary or Monica?
No, unfortunately, this summer we thought it was going to be much sooner than it has been, and we had grand plans in place, but we've not gotten any updates.
Got it. Okay, thank you so much.
Yep. Janani Ganesh.
Yes, hello. Just first, thank you for all the wonderful information. I'm really happy that you guys are participating in this program. My question was around the testing options that are available at MVLA and Los Altos High School. The question was around, is that only available for asymptomatic testing? Or if, as we approach the flu season and, children develop sniffles and other symptoms, is that convenience available for any type of drop-in testing?
It is only for the asymptomatic at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Jeannie.
Hi, I just want to thank you guys for partnering up with MVLA. Thank you so much. I've been emailing you guys about that. So thank you for making it happen. I have 3 questions for you. The first one is, what percentage of families have given consent so far? The second one is, I see that there's now a new column on the dashboard for P. Wasn't sure what that means, as we don't seem to have a school that starts with P on the positive case numbers. The third one is, you mentioned earlier that we don't accept antigen tests. Or you do accept antigen tests, but not at home tests. The Abbott Binax now is an antigen test, but it's considered at home. Is that correct? Thank you very much.
So I'll take the first 2. Jeannie, I'm blanking on the first question. The P is for preschool. We have a preschool program on the Covington campus. It is segregated from the main campus. It's back behind the district office. What was the first one, Jeannie?
The first one was, what percentage of families have opted in so far?
So we're just under 50% right now, I would say, on average across the district.
Okay, thank you.
And then the question about antigen tests.
Yeah, so the type of test that we're allowed to accept is directed by public health. And so even though we will do response testing for asymptomatic people with an antigen test, and they will be most likely the same antigen test you would have at home, it does have to be observed by someone who has been trained. So that's why at this point, we are not allowed to take at-home antigen tests that you've administered at home.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right, Brooke Lopez.
Hello. Thank you so much for doing this. I feel so much better. So I have a couple of questions. One about the timing, just to clarify, Mary, you said earlier that the swabs happen, they get overnighted away to some magical place, and it takes 2 to 3 days, 2 days, 1 to 2 days to get the results back. So between the time of swab and the time of the result could be 2 to 3 days because of the overnighting.
I can't make promises, but last year we did not see it go beyond 2 days.
Great. That's
but
awesome.
that it depends, like there can be disruptions in shipping, so we can't
Right.
promise that, but they were very fast with their turnaround.
Okay, great. So one question about the children who have opted out. Do they come to school the next day when there has been a positive in the pool?
No.
So if you opt out then and there's a positive in your child's classroom, your kids have to stay home for what? Until they receive a negative?
So the situation is actually the same for all the students in the class. You have to get you have to produce a negative test result before you can come back to class. Those who opt in to the pooled testing program will have the convenience of doing that on campus as they walk onto campus that next morning and get the results within 15 minutes, because we will be monitoring the results. And as kids test positive, they get to go to class. Those who do not opt into the program are going to be responsible for getting that same testing negative proof, but they're going to have to do that on their own.
So, okay, that makes sense. So either at Mountain View or Los Altos High School or wherever testing is provided. That makes sense. Parents out there, sign up, please. Or will the teachers be tested within the pool? As a part of the pool?
We are working on that right now. We, as I said, answered to an earlier question, we're prioritizing getting the kids addressed in the pooled testing, and then we'll move on to what makes sense for adults. And the complication there is that we have a lot of adults on campus. They aren't all just classroom teachers.
Right.
So pooling makes sense in some cases and it doesn't in other cases. So we just have to work through that.
That makes sense. Okay, and very last question, or maybe just a statement. We have a lot of parents in our district that aren't native English speakers. So I hope that we have lots of this information translated so that those parents feel as informed as they can be. And hopefully we can get a lot of people signed up to opt in for this.
Yeah, we are working on that as well, Brooke. And we actually have a community liaison hired this year who is doing individual outreach to families.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yep. All right, Michelle Hughes. Oh, sorry, Tina Hulse jumped ahead of Michelle Hughes. So Tina.
Hi, thanks. So we just had to go through a modified quarantine at our school, and I was a bit surprised that that our class was not notified of the exposure in the other fourth grade class. Is there a reason for that? And my second question is, when you have the follow-up antigen testing, are the families notified if there is a positive in the follow-up testing, and then does that delay the timeline for coming back for 5 days, the date of the last exposure, et cetera, et cetera?
Right. So let me answer the first part, and then Monica, I'll let you get into the date timing. Yeah, with our practice last year and continuing this year is we notify the class in which the exposure happened, and give them instructions for the follow-up testing. We post all positives on the district website that Jeannie was referencing earlier with her question. And the challenge really is protecting privacy of families and making sure those who need to know because they were close contacts are notified, while also protecting privacy of the child. So it's admittedly a difficult balance there, and one we take seriously and try to attend to both needs. But as our schools are quite small, it becomes easy in some cases to identify who and where the case came from. And we certainly don't want to be kind of adding to that. So that's the answer to that question. And then Monica, question about what if there's a second positive in that group?
Yeah, so absolutely. The class does get notified. Close contacts are notified if there is a positive case. And then, yes, that positive case, we would need to determine the infectious period and the last exposure date. And so it would essentially reset the clock, if I could say that. So they would need to test again immediately and again on day 5 after the last date of exposure. So the mod quarantine would start again.
Thank you.
And Tina, I think the one thing I would add is if there was a close contact in another class or in the school, those individuals would be notified as well. In fact, that has happened. Not in the most recent one at Gardner Bullis, but in a couple of earlier situations at other schools. All right, Michelle Hughes.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. This information is great. That was actually good timing that Tina went ahead of me, because I have a couple of questions all related to contact tracing. You had mentioned, our kids are in mosques except when they're eating. Do you do contact tracing with a positive test as to who they were sitting next to at lunch? And maybe I'm going to answer my own question, because then the follow-up to that is obviously they're only sitting with their classmates at lunchtime. Are you notifying the entire class when there's a positive, or is it, my understanding from what the information we received at the beginning of the year, and I get that this is ever changing, is it was really only kids sitting within 3 feet? And then last sort of follow-up question is where it comes to kids with siblings in the same school, potentially if one sibling is positive and the other one is not, or not yet, are they kept home, and are those close contacts of those siblings notified too?
Monica, those are all for you.
All right, so let me see if I recall all these questions. So for eating in an elementary campus, students are sitting with their classes to eat. So the entire class is notified of a positive case in that group. If there is a positive student, the sibling does not, actually, sorry. If there's a positive student, yes, the sibling is a household close contact and must quarantine at home. So they are not eligible for a modified quarantine. They do, and again, Mary and I work through each of these cases specifically because there are always nuances. Some families are able to isolate away from the positive individual, and some families are not. That doesn't work for their household. So we have to determine when the last date of exposure is. So if the siblings are together in the same household and cannot be separated, they are constantly exposed to each other. So that sibling who is not tested positive, their quarantine would start after the positive case ends isolation. So we are looking at upwards of 17 to 18 days. Again, they do a shortened quarantine is what we call that. So there's no longer a 10-day requirement. If you test on day 5 after the last day of exposure, the child can return back to school on day 8 if that test is negative. So I know that's a lot of information, but again, we work through each of these situations really closely with the family and kind of go through and ask all these questions to see what's applicable to that situation. And I'm really sorry, Michelle, you're going to have to tell me that last question that you had.
No, I think you covered it. It was really
Okay.
all around contact tracing. So thank you so much. I'm sure when you guys became school nurses, this was not what you signed up for. So thank you for everything you do.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Michelle. Kiwi.
Oh, sorry, my question was, are we going to be able to be in the pool? But I do have a question that I came up with after Mrs. Hughes. We have nut-free tables at school. Should we not allow students to sit with other students from other classes and just have them separated so that they're in their own, they're only with their classmates when their masks are off? That's my question.
Mary or Monica, do we have an answer to that one off the top of your head? I would say yes, they should only be sitting with their classmates, but we'll obviously have to account for the allergy. So that's one we'll have to take up specifically at.
And if they're 6 feet, if they can be kept if they're from different classrooms, if they can be kept 6 feet apart, which often at those tables, they're large. One child could sit on one side and the other, on the other. So that would be an option as well. I don't know how many students you would have at a table, but if that's an option, you could certainly have 2 different students, but as long as they're 6 feet apart, they could be at the same table.
Okay, and then can I ask another question as well?
Sure.
This is new to all of us. This whole pandemic, all of these aspects, and the information is a bit confusing. And I'm hoping that the 50%, which I think is on the low side of it, parents being willing to, because if I had a child that age, I would be definitely, I feel like it's a safety, a help for all of our students. So I was wondering if maybe there could be a video made, like a model to show how it's done. So parents aren't worried if that's what it is that they're worried about. Because if you think of, a medical administration of your child, it automatically sends up, oh no one's going to do that with my child. So I think if they had more understanding, we'd probably have a better percentage of parents. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kiwi. All right, Mr. and Mrs. Chang.
Hi, thank you guys so much for working on this kind of program. Really appreciate it. Wanted to ask, with the vaccine rollout being kind of really uncertain at this point, when are you guys planning to actually test the students?
Well, I'm not quite sure I understand your question. Are you asking when is it going to begin?
Yes. When is this testing program going to begin?
Yeah, we are shooting for the 20th of September right now.
Okay. And I was wondering what would prompt the antigen testing that you guys mentioned that's available?
So the antigen testing is used for response testing if there is a positive returned from the pool testing.
Okay.
So if you think of it, if there's a 3rd grade class of 22 kids, if we find a positive in that class, those 22 students are going to need to receive an antigen test. If they're doing it with us, if they've consented to pool, or if they've consented to pool testing, they're going to get the antigen response testing the next day in order for us to see a negative result to return to class. So hopefully we never have to use the antigen testing, right? That would mean we never get a positive result from a pool, because that's when we use the antigen testing.
That's part of the rapid response testing?
Correct.
Well, thank you.
All right, thanks. All right, Denise Padilla.
Hi, thank you guys so much for the time this evening. My question is, will the parents be notified of the percentage of students that actually end up participating in this program within their children's classroom?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. I haven't really thought of that, Denise.
Okay, no problem.
And we'll certainly consider it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, we have a number of more questions. I'm going to cut off the questions with Sid ready. He's the last one. So if you haven't yet raised your hands, I'm going to ask you to send that in via email. To me would be fine. All right, Johnny Chung.
Yes, I have a question about, let's say if someone is tested positive but is asymptomatic, so how long does a person need quarantine, or like it have to be until like the person tested negative result?
Yes, great question. Thank you. So we don't ask for another test if someone has tested positive. The isolation period is 10 days and it's determined from the symptom onset date or the test collection date if the individual is asymptomatic.
And there's no requirement for them to say test negative before they get return to school?
No, they just must complete, well, they must complete 10 days. And then if they have symptoms, improvement in symptoms and be fever-free for 24 hours. If they were asymptomatic, they need to do 10 days from the test collection date so they can return on day 11. And we do not need a follow-up negative test.
Okay.
Thank you. Monique, why?
Hi, thank you. I have two questions for you. So is the expectation to have kindergartners test themselves as well? And the second question is, how accurate are the results given that this test is self-administered?
Mary, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so the kindergartners and TK students as well will be instructed on how to do this. And I would say they're pretty good at picking noses at that age. So I think they'll be pretty successful. And that the testing is monitored by the team. And so I could say, I mean, it is a very simple thing to do and kids are pretty proud when they're able to do it. So I would have a high confidence in this.
And I would just say, add to that, that Concentric, the testing company we're using, is doing, we're not their first client. They are doing this in schools around the country.
Jeff, could I add one more thing?
Yeah.
One of the reasons that you should not sign your child up is if they have tested positive within the last 3 months. We would ask them not to test in the pooled testing because people can test positive for 3 months after a positive or an infection. So if they certainly can join our testing after that 3 month date. But if they have been positive, please do not have them participate in pooled testing for 3 months after.
All right, thanks, Monique. Erica Wiltermuth.
Hi, I have a couple questions. Are they removing their masks in the classroom to do this test? If there's a positive pool test, when they come back to do the rapid test the next day, assuming they've opted in, are we expecting a substitute teacher then, since the teachers aren't a part of the pool testing process? Or are the teachers able to do the rapid antigen test when the students do? And then what if there's a positive pool test? The children who are a part of that pool test come in to test, retest, but all of those tests come back negative. There's no positive identified, assuming that Concentric's statistical confidence isn't 100%. Do you retest all the students, or is it they just have to test once negative and they all get to go back in the classroom?
So let's see, first, where they test. They will administer the test outside. We will not have them take their masks off inside the classrooms. Last year, we did this on the, right out in front of the classrooms or, in the hallways so that they are outside. Monica, do you want to talk about a teacher of that class who is vaccinated?
Yeah, so fully vaccinated individuals are not required to quarantine. So they will be able to get tested. But again, it's a strong recommendation for testing. They do not need to quarantine at home if they're fully vaccinated.
As long as they're asymptomatic.
Correct. Yes.
And then Mary, do you want to talk about that scenario? Can you speak to that scenario?
Yes, and that third one is the hardest. That's the question we've wrestled with, and we've consulted with the county. So if that situation presents itself where there's a positive pool, we do not pick up. We have tested everyone from that pool with an antigen test, and no one has tested positive. We would work in consultation with Santa Clara County Public Health to determine next steps, and the classroom would be informed at that time.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Erica. Leanne Bacall.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I do apologize. Some of my questions might be repetitive. I'm multitasking, so you can roll your eyes. That's totally fine. One actually question that came up following somebody else's, they were talking about the lunch tables, and I might have misunderstood, and I'm just hoping that we don't change anything in the elementary schools right now, given that I believe outside the kids are allowed to sit with whom they would like to sit with at lunch, and they don't have to sit only with their class. And I am hoping that that can remain as such, because I think it's important as we try to let our kids get back to some sort of normalcy. My other, that was sort of a statement, but my question, you mentioned about extracurricular, and what I wasn't understanding, if a child, if we get notification that, let's say my child had a close contact of somebody who's positive, regardless of how you find out, my child has to do a test immediately, and if she's asymptomatic, she can return, if I'm correct, and then she needs to do, as long as she stays asymptomatic, another test 5 days later. But within this time period, she's not to do anything extracurricular. When you say extracurricular, do you mean extracurricular associated with school, or are you talking about anything that that child does unrelated to LASD?
The latter.
So you're asking that the child not do anything unrelated to LASD until the 5 days are up?
Until the 8th day. And it's not us that is asking, it's Santa Clara County Public Health Department.
I see. And the 8th day from the point of exposure, is that right? The day of exposure?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. I think that was where I keep getting stumped, because it seems, I get it. It makes sense to protect those outside of school, but then why are they allowed back in the classroom as opposed to at their tennis lesson, for example?
So we're really focusing on the in-person instruction for students, and really going by, again, these are also for masked situations, right? So in our district, we have masking. We're able to closely monitor that versus extracurriculars. There's a whole wide range of protocols out there, which makes it a little bit harder. But we want to preserve and really support students being able to attend school. And so this is something CDPH and Santa Clara County have put in place in order for students to be able to attend school, but also quarantine and limit exposure to surrounding community members for that modified shortened quarantine period.
Okay, thank you. I understand. It makes a lot of sense. Do you know if other school districts are doing similarly, or you're unsure about that?
Yes, in terms of the exclusion from extracurricular?
Yes.
Yes, that is a CDPH guidance, not a district.
That's a statewide California guidance, right?
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you. All right, Cynthia Razzo.
Good evening, and thank you. Well, first, thank you for implementing all these procedures to keep our kids safe and in school. I know this is a lot of work and a lot of effort goes into this. So thank you for that. My question is, I guess I can piggyback on the extracurricular activities, is in regards to field trips. I believe we are having field trips taking place in school in the near future, like sometime end of September starting. Wouldn't this give a higher risk of getting kids infected outside of school by exposing them on field trips? Here at school, at least we have control of what kids can do and not. But once we go on field trips off-site, we don't have much control. So it almost sounds like if the field trip itself is a search for exposure, are field trips really going to take place, and how are we going to effectively deal with that? Thank you.
So yes, so field trips are going to take place. Yes, we actually did participated in field trips in the spring of last school year also. There are protocols in place for each of the venues the field trips visit. And since it is a school event, the kids are required to wear masks indoors and outdoors. It's a school event, so we're going to require that. And those same protocols are going to be followed. And as we look at the various venues, each of those places has protocols in place also that adhere to the State of California Department of Public Health guidelines. So we do have confidence that we can accomplish this safely, because we do know the regulations and rules and protocols to have in place to keep our kids safe. All right, Vijay Devarapalli.
So the thing that you just mentioned, like 20 minutes ago, that if you're not part of the pool testing, you will be missing 2 to 3 days of school because you have to get testing from outside, is definitely not coming through in all the communication you've sent out. If that is made clear, I think more people will participate in the pool testing, because there is a huge difference between able to go to school next day, tested in 15 minutes, you're in the class, versus having to stay at home for 2-3 days till you get the result back from wherever you went for the test. I do think that for this program to be successful, you need 90+% participation. It's kind of dumb to do this with 50% participation. It just makes no sense. You're just setting up everyone for a failure, and it's a waste of time. So whatever it is that you need to do, incentivize, disincentivize, whatever it is, you have to get that about 90%. And I think one of these things that you could potentially miss 2 to 3 days of school versus getting tested the next morning is not at all coming, because we just went through a modified quarantine period at Loyola, and we could continue going to school for all those 8 days while we do the 2 tests and the test results showing negative. I think a lot of parents might still be thinking that's what is going to be the case.
Got it. Thank you. Appreciate that insight. Julie Volkert.
Hi, this is actually Todd Volkert. I had a couple questions. Number one, the modified quarantine is only for unvaccinated kids, right? If the pool tests positive and you're vaccinated, like for instance for junior high kids, then there's no modified quarantine. You can still continue to do extracurriculars.
Monica.
So you still need to do, so testing is still recommended for if you're fully vaccinated, but you can, yes, you can still do extracurriculars if fully vaccinated.
If you're asymptomatic.
If you're asymptomatic, yes. Thank you, Jeff, for adding that in every time.
Is there any chance of false positives in the pool testing? When we did the pilot of this last year, were there false positives at all? And how does that work?
So we did not have any positives, so no false positives. And I guess anything is possible. You would never say anything's 100%, but this is a very well well-run program. So I don't know what the possibility is there of their false positives is. I could look it up and get back to you, but it's a very, very well-run lab.
Okay.
And the pool testing is a PCR test.
Okay, great. And then the final one, I'm a little confused. I'm sorry, I probably just wasn't paying attention close enough. I remember hearing that you said the second test you get on the 5th day, and then if that's negative, you could return, but then I heard later that it was the 8th day. So can you clarify that?
So you test immediately and then return upon negative test, and then you test again on day 5. So this is for modified quarantine, and students would continue to come to school if the antigen response testing is being done in response to the pooled test. So if we have a positive test that's outside of pooled testing, then that is when the response testing would potentially take place off of campus. So you would need to go to MBLA or Los Altos High or your practitioner, get a negative result, and then your child can come to school once we have the negative.
Okay. So it's a difference between being in the pool versus not in the pool testing.
Correct. And then
if you're doing the testing outside of the pool testing response that we administer, if you test after day 5, it's probably going to be, day 6 or maybe day 7 when you get the results, if you're not able to get a rapid test.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you very
Monica,
much.
were you going to say something else?
Yeah, I was just gonna, clear up what the modified quarantine, which is what I just described with the 2 tests, and then the shortened quarantine, which is when you test on day 5 and you can come back on day 8. But this would not allow you to be in school during that time. Does that make sense?
I understand that last part, sorry.
So the modified quarantine, in order to be part of modified quarantine and attend school, we do need to have 2 tests. So that first test immediately and then test again on day 5.
So Todd, the other is if a family says, I'm not going to do the immediate test, I don't want to do the modified quarantine, we'll just sit this out, they can return after they do a test
On or after day 5.
On or after day 5, and then return on day 8.
Okay. Okay.
It provides a pathway for those who don't want to do the immediate testing and the modified quarantine.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you guys so much.
Yep. Thanks. All right, Ling Wang.
Thank you for the presentation this evening. It's very informative. So I have a question about the close contact. So say if there is positive in the class, how do we identify the students who might be in contact with some of the students in that class, but outside their classroom? Because kids are having lunch together and maybe with their friends in another class or playing sports at recess or lunchtime. And how is the kids outside that classroom be notified if they actually had close contact with the positive one? You know what I mean?
Right. So answering the first part, and earlier, I think it was Leanne asked about or made a comment about eating with friends. We are shifting back to eating with classroom for that 15 minutes, and then they can play with friends out on the playground. But we really, in prioritizing kids being in school and not having to quarantine as frequently, are prioritizing being a bit safer when kids have their masks down.
Oh, okay. I
So
haven't heard that. So
we
that's
did,
a shift of policy.
yeah, we did shift that. And then, I mean, Monica, maybe you can speak just a little bit about, I know this is one of the more complicated pieces of close contact tracing is finding out, are there other people this child's been, been close to physically during this time.
Right. So yeah, so there is, the contact tracing piece, which is great within 0 to 6 feet for greater than 15 minutes. And I mean, it really does come down to, are we able to identify who this child is with all the time in an outdoor play setting? They do play, but they're also in constant movement, which is another thing to really consider, is that they're not stagnant with somebody for extended periods of time. We have had cases where it is clearly identified that a particular individual only spends time with 2 other people or 3 other people at break time, and so those are close contacts, and we have contacted those families. So we're conducting contact tracing the best that we can, but as Jeff mentioned, for those periods of time where they're eating unmasked, closer together and more stagnant, so sitting there for a period of time to eat, we are having them sit together with their classrooms to minimize that exposure to other people.
Okay, thank you. My second question is, you had mentioned, this is about modified quarantine, and you had mentioned that if there is a positive within the class and all the kids in the class will be tested next day and need to produce a negative result in order to come back to school. And but does that including vaccinated and both vaccinated and unvaccinated, or only unvaccinated kids will need to produce a negative result to come back?
If there is a positive pooled test, everybody needs to produce a negative test to come back to class, vaccinated or not, because we need to be able to identify who has tested positive.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Amy Wang.
Hi, this is Gabe with Amy. Can you talk a little bit about how this differs for middle school? Because the kids they're not just in one class, they're moving classes. So what is their pool? And then how is the contact tracing different?
Yeah, so for middle school, we are doing their pooled testing during their jumpstart or advisory period, because once they start moving, they'll be in a different pool. And it really is to give us an idea of if there are positive cases on campus. So our response testing would be directed toward that group of students. Plus, then we will work off of seating charts to see who was a close contact of that student. So within 6 feet of where they are in their seating chart.
Okay, great, thanks. So just a follow-up to that. So while they're at brunch and lunch, since it's middle school, will you be asking the student to help identify close contact then? That's outside of, there are no seating charts for those situations, so. Sorry, more complicated, I think.
Yeah, so I think like in the younger children, if there are friends, if they have a very close friend group that they always spend time with, certainly we would take that into consideration while we do the contact tracing.
Great, thank you.
All right, and then there was one, Arthi K.
So if somebody has to quarantine, will there be any instruction given to them when they're at home? That's my question.
Monica, you want to take that?
So instruction meaning like class instruction?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so sorry about that. I misread that question.
That's okay.
So there will be homework sent home. Kids will check check online for homework, depending on the grade level, depending on the class, but there won't be online instruction when kids are at home because of a quarantine.
So Jeff, this is Aarti. That was my husband Anand. I had a quick follow-up. So I have two kids in the elementary school. So one is really young and one is slightly older. So the really young one, I don't know how he will be able to do the nose swab himself. And so I'm sure he'll see his peers and he'll be able to figure it out. But then if there is a positive test in one classroom, in one of the kids' classroom, how does that impact me, the parent, with the other kid? Right? Like I have two kids, both on campus, right? One kid's classroom test positive. So how do I then, what are the protocols for me to follow? Because I have another kid on the site, on campus as well.
Right, so you'll have one child in school and one child not in school, right?
I see. So I don't have to keep both kids at home or have to take a test for both of them?
No. So if, and I'm assuming in what you described there, it is not your child who was the positive. Is that correct?
Because the next day they have to get tested, and assuming, yes, my one of the children whose classroom tested positive is not positive. Right?
Yeah, so if your children are not the positive, right, then just because one of your children was in a classroom with a positive, so one of your children's a close contact, that does not make the other child a close contact also.
Got it. And I had another follow-up question. Are all classrooms tested on the same day? So because
at each school, all the classrooms are tested on the same day.
Okay, that's helpful to know, because if one classroom tests positive, the pool test positive, but the other classroom is tested on a different day, then there is a gap, and then that can be confusing. Okay, got it. Thank you.
All right, Sid is back for our last question. Sid, ready?
Hi, this is Sushma. For those who are opting out, will they be required to submit proof of testing on a weekly or every other week basis to the school?
They will not.
And so may I ask why there's an opt-in and an opt-out option at all?
This is not a program we have to do, right? It's not a required program. We are choosing to do this, and we as a public school cannot make testing mandatory as a function of attendance.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, with that, I'm going to thank all of you for attending, and always appreciate your time. If you haven't signed up for the pool testing yet, please do. If you have friends and neighbors who you are not sure if they've signed up yet, please remind them. We'll be sending out reminders as well, and we won't stop once the the initial deadline hits. We will keep, dare I say, hounding people to consider opting into the pool testing. So again, you can help out as well, please, by checking with your children's classmates' parents and your neighbors, and we'll do the same on our end. This is really something we can all do together to make sure we keep kids in school and make sure we keep our students and our staff safe. So thank you again for attending, and if you have any other questions, please feel free to email. Have a great night.